Despite the cruel way my husband abandoned me, I, Jennifer, continued to care for my ailing mother-in-law, Barbara, who had once been nothing but abusive. She was a bitter woman, yet there was something about her fragility that stopped me from walking away. I guess I thought if I could take care of her, maybe I could heal something inside myself, too. One day, I returned home earlier than usual. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, painting the sky a melancholy orange. I pushed the door open, expecting the same usual scene, David on the couch with a beer, Barbara scowling from her chair, but what I saw made me freeze in my tracks. There, in my small kitchen, a stranger was rummaging through the cabinets. He was a burly man with an unshaven face, wearing a suit that looked oddly familiar. He turned around, startled, as I stepped in. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking, glancing behind me for signs of David. He laughed, a low guttural sound. "Relax, sweetheart. I'm just here for something your husband owes." My heart pounded, and I felt my stomach drop. David's debts. I had thought they were just his drinking buddies, but this was something darker, something far worse. I kept my distance, staying silent, trying to assess the situation. The man shrugged and left without another word, leaving behind an ominous chill that clung to the air like smoke. I could feel the coldness seeping into my bones, but I had no time to stand still. Barbara needed her medications, and I couldn't let anything disrupt her schedule. "David," I called out, my voice rising. "Where are you?" The living room remained empty, with nothing but the distant hum of the television playing an old sitcom, the laughter sounding eerie against the silence. I spotted David through the window, standing outside, arguing with someone on the phone, his face red with anger. When he came back inside, his eyes barely met mine. "Who was that man in our house?" I asked, my voice trembling with both anger and fear. David shrugged, reaching for another beer. "Just someone from work. Nothing for you to worry about." "Nothing for me to worry about." "David, there's a stranger in our home, rummaging through our kitchen." He sighed heavily. "Jennifer, just let it go. You're making a big deal out of nothing." He pushed past me, clearly uninterested in explaining himself. That night, I could barely sleep, thoughts running circles in my mind. Was it about money? Was David involved in something illegal? The questions multiplied, each one more terrifying than the last. I looked over at David, his body sprawled across the bed, snoring lightly. He seemed utterly at peace, and I felt an ugly anger boil inside of me. How could he sleep so easily while I was drowning in uncertainty? The next morning, I decided to put it all aside, for Barbara's sake. I entered her room with a forced smile, carrying her breakfast. She looked up, her eyes still sharp despite her frailty. "You're late," she snapped. "I'm sorry, Barbara," I replied, my voice as gentle as I could make it. I had a lot on my mind. "Too much mind and not enough work," she muttered, her hands trembling as she took the tray. I bit my tongue, holding back the retort that had been on the tip of my tongue for months now. It wasn't until later that day, when the doorbell rang, that things took an even darker turn. I opened the door, and my heart skipped a beat. A young woman stood there, her eyes wide, a blonde bob framing her face. She looked nervous, glancing around as though unsure of whether she should even be here. "Hi, is David here?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Who are you?" I asked, suspicion brewing deep within me. She bit her lip. I think it's best if I just speak to David." I heard the floor creak behind me, and I turned to see David standing in the hallway, his face draining of color as he saw her. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" There was something in his voice, something soft, tender, that I hadn't heard in years. It sent a jolt of pain through my chest. I stepped aside, and Sarah walked in, her eyes meeting David's, something unspoken passing between them. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes flickering towards me nervously. David nodded, his shoulders sagging. "Jennifer, can you give us a minute?" I stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious, David? Who is this?" "Just please," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I'll explain later." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I turned and walked away, my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists. I stood in the kitchen, trying to steady my breath, listening to the muffled voices from the living room. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear them, but one word reached me, one word that shattered everything. "Baby." My knees almost buckled. Baby. Was this woman pregnant? My hands flew to my mouth, stifling the sob that rose in my throat. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the living room, my vision blurred by tears. "David, what is going on?" He turned to me, his face pale. "Jennifer, I was going to tell you, I swear. This is. Sarah is." Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with both fear and pity. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You're sorry?" I spat, the words bitter on my tongue. "You're sorry for what?" "For ruining my marriage. For showing up here like this." David stepped forward, his hands raised. "Jennifer, please, it's not what you think." "Not what I think." I laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "Then tell me, David. Tell me what it really is." He looked at Sarah, then at me, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Guilt. Real, deep guilt. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "I got involved with Sarah when you and I were struggling. I thought. I don't know what I thought." Sarah stepped closer, her hand on her stomach. "I'm pregnant, Jennifer," she said softly. "And David. David wants to be there for the baby." I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. The room spun, and I reached out, grabbing the edge of the table to steady myself. David's words, Sarah's presence, it all blurred together in a whirlpool of betrayal and heartbreak. Barbara's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. "What is going on here?" She had shuffled into the living room, her cane tapping the floor, her eyes sharp as she took in the scene. David swallowed hard, his face contorting with a mix of shame and frustration. "Mom, I messed up. Sarah is pregnant." Barbara's face turned an alarming shade of red, her eyes narrowing. "You fool," she hissed. "You've brought shame on this family. After everything Jennifer has done for you, for me. How dare you?" David flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. I had never seen Barbara so angry, not even in her worst moments with me. She pointed her cane at him, her voice trembling. "If you want to go with her, go. But don't you dare expect any sympathy from me." David looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, I saw the boy I had once fallen in love with, lost, confused, scared. But it was too late. The love I had felt for him had been buried under years of neglect, and now, this betrayal. "Go," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Just go." Sarah looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer." I shook my head, unable to speak, as David took her hand and led her out of the house. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through the empty room. Barbara stood there, her eyes on me, her face softening. "Jennifer, I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "Don't," I said, my voice cracking. "Just don't." She reached out, her hand trembling, and for the first time, she touched my arm gently. "I know I've been hard on you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But you don't deserve this. No one deserves this." I looked at her, my vision blurred by tears. For years, I had hated this woman, resented every cruel word she had ever spoken. But in that moment, I saw her differently. I saw a woman who had been broken by life, just like me. And I saw a glimmer of something I had never thought possible: understanding. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice shaky. "Together." The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. I tried to keep myself busy, focusing on taking care of Barbara, who had grown strangely quiet, almost kind. She no longer barked orders at me, no longer criticized every little thing I did. Instead, she watched me with sad eyes, her frail hands trembling as she reached out to help whenever she could. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, the phone rang. It was Lily, my best friend, my only friend. Her voice was tense, urgent. "Jennifer, I need to see you. It's important." "Lily, I can't leave," I said, glancing at Barbara, who was sitting in her chair, staring out the window. "Please, Jennifer," Lily's voice was almost desperate. "It's about David." My heart skipped a beat. "What about David?" "I can't say over the phone." "Just please come." I hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. I'll be there." I turned to Barbara, who looked at me with questioning eyes. "I need to go out for a bit," I said, my voice trembling. "Lily needs me." Barbara nodded, her eyes softening. "Go. I'll be fine." I left the house, my heart pounding as I made my way to Lily's. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. When I arrived, Lily opened the door, her face pale, her eyes filled with worry. "What's going on, Lily?" I asked, my voice shaky. She led me to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured us coffee. "Jennifer," she began, her voice cracking. "I saw David last night." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Lily looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "He was with another woman. Not Sarah. Someone else. He was drunk, and they were." She trailed off, her voice breaking, and I felt my heart shatter all over again. I had thought the worst was over, thought that I had faced the ultimate betrayal. But this was a new level of pain. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer," Lily whispered, her hand reaching out to cover mine. "I didn't want to tell you, but you deserve to know the truth." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The tears came, hot and fast, and I let them fall, not caring anymore. I had lost everything: my husband, my home, my sense of self. What was left for me now? "You have me," Lily said, as if reading my thoughts. "And you have yourself. You're stronger than you think, Jennifer. You can get through this." I looked at her, her words wrapping around me like a lifeline. I nodded, my heart aching, but for the first time, I felt a tiny spark of hope. When I returned home, Barbara was waiting for me, her eyes filled with worry. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, my heart heavy. "I'll be okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She reached out, her frail hand covering mine. "I may not have said it before, but I'm grateful for you, Jennifer. More than you'll ever know." I looked at her, tears filling my eyes. For the first time, I saw a flicker of love in her eyes, a love that had been buried beneath years of bitterness and pain. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could both find a way to heal. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions, of trying to piece my life back together. David was gone, and with him, the life I had known. But in his absence, I found something I hadn't expected: freedom. Freedom to make my own choices, to live my life on my terms. Barbara and I grew closer in those weeks. She opened up to me about her past, about the pain she had carried for so long. And I found myself sharing my own stories, my own fears and dreams. We were two broken women, trying to find a way to heal, and in each other, we found something we had both been missing for so long: family. One night, as we sat in the living room, Barbara looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I want you to have everything, Jennifer," she said, her voice trembling. "The house, the money, all of it. I want you to have a future, a real future." I stared at her, stunned. "Barbara, I can't." She shook her head. "You can. You deserve it. You've given me more than I could ever repay." The tears came, and I let them fall, my heart swelling with gratitude and love. For the first time in years, I felt hope, real, tangible hope. I had lost so much, but I had gained something far more precious: a sense of self, a sense of purpose, and a family that, though unconventional, was mine. And as I looked at Barbara, her frail body curled up on the couch, her eyes soft with love, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together. Because in the end, it wasn't the family I had lost that defined me, it was the family I had found. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I started making plans for my future, something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. Barbara encouraged me to go back to school, to pursue my passion for cooking that I had long buried under the weight of responsibilities. She would sit with me, her eyes brightening as we spoke about opening a small bakery one day, a place where I could share my love for baking with the world. It was a dream that seemed almost within reach now, something I could work toward with hope in my heart. One day, Barbara handed me a worn notebook. "This was mine," she said, her voice filled with a mix of nostalgia and regret. "I used to write down recipes when I was younger. I never got to do much with them, but maybe you can." I opened the notebook, and the pages were filled with faded handwriting, recipes for cakes, pastries, and desserts that spoke of a time when Barbara had been someone else, someone hopeful, someone who had dreams of her own. I spent hours reading through that notebook, feeling connected to Barbara in a way I hadn't thought possible. Each recipe was a glimpse into the person she used to be, and I could see the love she had once had for life, for creating something beautiful. It inspired me, and I began to experiment in the kitchen, trying out her old recipes, tweaking them and making them my own. Barbara would sit at the kitchen table, watching me with a soft smile, her eyes filled with pride. As time went on, our bond grew stronger. Barbara began to open up about her past in a way she never had before. She spoke of her childhood, of the hardships she had faced, of the love she had lost and the bitterness that had taken root in her heart. I listened, my heart aching for the woman who had endured so much pain. And as she spoke, I began to understand her better, to see the person beneath the harsh exterior. She wasn't just my mother-in-law, she was a woman who had been hurt, who had built walls around herself to survive. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Barbara looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "I pushed people away because I was scared. I hurt you, and I hurt David. I thought if I kept everyone at a distance, I wouldn't get hurt again. But I was wrong." She reached out, taking my hand in hers. "You've shown me what it means to love, Jennifer. You've shown me that it's never too late to change. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed her hand. "You've taught me a lot too, Barbara. You've taught me that people can change, that love can grow in the most unexpected places. I never thought I'd find a family here, but I have. And I wouldn't trade it for anything." Barbara smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. Maybe it's time we both start living for ourselves, Jennifer. Maybe it's time we both start chasing our dreams. With Barbara's encouragement, I enrolled in a culinary course at the local community center. It was a small step, but it was the first step toward building the future I had always dreamed of. I would spend my mornings taking care of Barbara, and in the afternoons, I would head to class, learning new techniques, honing my skills, and feeling a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. I was finally doing something for myself, and it felt incredible. Barbara's health continued to decline, but her spirit remained strong. She would ask me about my classes, her eyes lighting up as I shared stories of the dishes I had created, the people I had met. She was my biggest supporter, and I could see how proud she was of me. It gave me the strength to keep going, even on the days when the weight of everything threatened to pull me down. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, Barbara called me into the living room. She was sitting in her favorite chair, a stack of papers on her lap. "Jennifer," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what will happen after I'm gone. I want to make sure you're taken care of, that you have everything you need to build the life you deserve." I sat down beside her, my heart heavy. "Barbara, you don't have to worry about that. You've already done so much for me." She shook her head, her eyes filled with determination. "I want you to have everything, Jennifer. The house, the money, it's all yours. I want you to have a future, a real future. And I want you to promise me that you'll keep chasing your dreams, that you'll open that bakery one day." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I promise, Barbara. I'll make you proud." Barbara smiled, her eyes softening. "You already have, my dear. More than you know." In the months that followed, I threw myself into my studies, into my dreams. I began to make plans for the bakery, sketching out ideas, researching locations, and thinking about what I wanted it to be. It was a dream that had once seemed impossible, but now, with Barbara's support, it felt within reach. I could see it clearly, a small, cozy place filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and pastries, a place where people could come together, share a cup of coffee, and find a moment of peace. Barbara's health continued to decline, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. But even on those days, she would ask me about my plans, her eyes filled with hope. She was fighting, holding on with everything she had, and I knew she was doing it for me. She wanted to see me succeed, to see me build the life I had always dreamed of. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, Barbara took my hand in hers. Her eyes were tired, her breathing labored, but there was a softness in her gaze that filled my heart with warmth. "Jennifer," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've become the daughter I never had, and I love you more than words can say." Tears streamed down my face as I leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you too, Barbara. More than you'll ever know." She smiled, her eyes closing as she took a deep breath. "Promise me you'll keep going, that you'll live your life to the fullest. Promise me you'll be happy." I nodded, my voice breaking as I whispered, "I promise." Barbara passed away that night, her hand still holding mine. It was peaceful, and I knew she had found the peace she had been searching for all her life. I sat with her, my heart heavy with grief, but also filled with love and gratitude for the time we had shared. She had been my family, my friend, my supporter, and I knew I would carry her memory with me always. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into making our dream a reality. I found a small space in town, a perfect spot for the bakery Barbara and I had dreamed of. I used her recipes, the ones from her old notebook, and added my own twist to them. I poured my heart and soul into every detail, determined to honor Barbara's memory and the love she had given me. The day the bakery opened, I stood behind the counter, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. The door opened, and the first customer walked in, Lily. She smiled, her eyes filled with pride as she looked around. "You did it, Jennifer," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Barbara would be so proud." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. I couldn't have done it without her. Or without you. Lily reached across the counter, taking my hand in hers. "This is just the beginning, Jennifer. You're going to do amazing things." As I looked around the bakery, the smell of freshly baked bread filling the air, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. I had lost so much, but I had gained something far more precious, a sense of self, a sense of purpose, and a family that, though unconventional, was mine. And as I watched the customers come in, their faces lighting up as they tasted the pastries, I knew that Barbara was with me, that her love and her spirit were a part of everything I had created. No matter what lay ahead, I knew I would face it with courage, with love, and with the knowledge that I was never truly alone. Because in the end, it wasn't the family I had lost that defined me, it was the family I had found, the love that had grown in the most unexpected places, and the dreams that had finally come true.